The night had begun like any other, with the moon hanging low and orange over the village, casting long, quiet shapes across the dusty ground. She had walked home from the river carrying a woven basket on her hip, humming the tune her mother used to sing. The air was still, heavy as if waiting for something to happen. At first she didn't notice anything unusual. She moved, and her shadow stretched behind her the way it always did. But then, halfway down the narrow path near the mango trees, she felt a sudden chill run across the back of her neck. It wasn't the wind, the night was too still for wind. It was something else, something that made her stop walking for a moment. When she paused, her shadow should have paused too. But it didn't. Her breath caught in her chest when the dark outline on the ground took another step forward, even though she hadn't moved. She stood frozen, too afraid to blink, too afraid to scream. She slowly raised her hand to touch her face, and her arm trembled as she lifted it. Her shadow did not lift its arm. It stood there, its shape still, almost waiting. For a moment she wondered if she was simply tired or seeing the darkness wrong. She blinked once, twice. The shadow remained separate from her, detached, alive in a way shadows were never meant to be. When it finally turned its head, just barely, just enough, toward her, her entire body pulsed with dread. Shadows did not turn. Shadows did not look. Shadows did not break away. She stumbled backward, the basket dropping from her hand and spilling its contents across the dirt, but her eyes never left the dark shape. Then, suddenly, it moved again, not with her, not because of her, but on its own. It began walking ahead, its steps slow and deliberate, as if leading the way or warning her to stay where she stood. Her heart hammered so loudly she thought the whole village could hear it. She forced herself to look away, to look toward the cluster of huts ahead. A few villagers walked nearby and she tried to call out to them, but her voice came out thin, strangled. None of them heard. None of them saw. But as she kept staring at her rogue shadow, something shifted in the air around her. The villagers weren't looking at her. They were looking behind her. Their expressions were uneasy, tense. One woman quickly picked up her child and hurried inside her hut. An old man whispered something under his breath, drawing symbols in the dust with trembling fingers. Two young boys stopped their game and sprinted away without a word. They didn't see her shadow. They saw her. Or rather, they saw something near her, around her, about her, something she herself couldn't see. Their fear only deepened her own. Finally, the shadow that had walked away stopped at the edge of the path. Slowly, as if guided by something she couldn't understand, it stretched taller, longer, wider. Its shape rippled, losing its resemblance to her body. It became something else, something with too many edges and not enough form. And then, without warning, it sank back into the ground and slid toward her feet like spilled ink. When it reached her, it hesitated for just a moment, almost as if deciding whether to rejoin her or not. Then it snapped back into place beneath her, perfectly aligned once again as if nothing had happened at all. But she knew what she had seen. And so did the villagers who hurried to shut their doors, whispering her name with fear in their voices. That was the night her shadow broke away, and nothing in the village ever felt safe again. The next morning she woke with her body heavy and her mind clouded, as if the night had crawled inside her and refused to leave. She barely slept, every sound making her flinch, every shift of light making her check whether her shadow still clung to her feet. She tried to convince herself that it had been a trick of the moonlight, exhaustion, or fear playing with her senses. But deep down she knew the truth. Shadows did not wander unless something far older and far darker had stirred them. The villagers avoided her as she walked toward the river, their eyes darting away, their whispers sharp as thorns. No one dared approach her, but everyone made sure she knew she was seen. The rumors had already begun spreading like smoke. Even before she reached the edge of the village, a child accidentally pointed at her before his mother slapped his hand down and whispered frantically into his ear. She kept her head low, her breath shallow. She only wanted water. She only wanted to feel normal for a moment. But normality had left her the moment her shadow had walked alone. She dipped her container into the river, trying not to look at the ground beside her. But the temptation was too strong. Slowly she shifted her gaze downward. Her shadow lay perfectly beneath her, unmoving. Yet there was something wrong with it, something she could not name. It seemed darker than it should be, thicker, as if the sunlight didn't quite pass through it. She jerked her eyes away and stood up quickly, almost stumbling. That was when she heard the voice. "You walk with something that doesn't belong to you." The words were old, cracked, like dry leaves rubbed between fingers. She turned to see the oldest woman in the village sitting on a stump near the trees. Her skin was the color of old bark, her hair gray and wild, her eyes clouded with age but strangely alert, as if she could see beyond what others saw. The villagers called her Nakora, the knower of forgotten things. Most avoided her, claiming she spoke too many truths that people wished to bury. But that morning she seemed to have been waiting. "I didn't ask for anything to follow me," she whispered, her hands trembling as she clutched the water container. The old woman chuckled, a low sound that did not carry humor. "No one asks. Shadows break only when something hunts the soul. And last night, child, yours was hunted." Her heart dropped. She wanted to deny it, wanted to tell the old woman that she didn't know what she was talking about. But the memory of her shadow stepping forward without her permission burned too brightly in her mind. "What does it want with me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The seer tilted her head, studying her with unsettling calm. "It wants what all lost things want. A home. A body. A name. You happened to walk where the wall between worlds thinned. And something old smelled your fear." Cold spread through her chest, slow and suffocating. "You must be wrong," she insisted weakly. "I did nothing." Nakora's expression hardened. "That is the danger. You think you were chosen because of your actions. No. These things choose because of what you are. Because of what sleeps in your blood." She stepped closer and the air around them seemed to tighten. "If your shadow separates again, do not follow it. Do not touch it. Do not speak to it. And if something else follows behind it," her voice dropped to a whisper, "do not look back." A shiver crawled down her spine. "What happens if I do?" The old woman leaned in so close she could smell the dust and herbs woven into her clothes. "Then it will claim you. Piece by piece. Breath by breath." The words hung in the air like a curse. Before she could question further, the old woman turned away, leaning heavily on her stick. "Go home before the sun falls. Tonight will be worse." And for the first time since last night, she felt truly afraid, not of her shadow but of what might be walking behind it. The next morning she woke with her body heavy and her mind clouded, as if the night had crawled inside her and refused to leave. She barely slept, every sound making her flinch, every shift of light making her check whether her shadow still clung to her feet. She tried to convince herself that it had been a trick of the moonlight, exhaustion, or fear playing with her senses. But deep down she knew the truth. Shadows did not wander unless something far older and far darker had stirred them. The villagers avoided her as she walked toward the river, their eyes darting away, their whispers sharp as thorns. No one dared approach her, but everyone made sure she knew she was seen. The rumors had already begun spreading like smoke. Even before she reached the edge of the village, a child accidentally pointed at her before his mother slapped his hand down and whispered frantically into his ear. She kept her head low, her breath shallow. She only wanted water. She only wanted to feel normal for a moment. But normality had left her the moment her shadow had walked alone. She dipped her container into the river, trying not to look at the ground beside her. But the temptation was too strong. Slowly she shifted her gaze downward. Her shadow lay perfectly beneath her, unmoving. Yet there was something wrong with it, something she could not name. It seemed darker than it should be, thicker, as if the sunlight didn't quite pass through it. She jerked her eyes away and stood up quickly, almost stumbling. That was when she heard the voice. "You walk with something that doesn't belong to you." The words were old, cracked, like dry leaves rubbed between fingers. She turned to see the oldest woman in the village sitting on a stump near the trees. Her skin was the color of old bark, her hair gray and wild, her eyes clouded with age but strangely alert, as if she could see beyond what others saw. The villagers called her Nakora, the knower of forgotten things. Most avoided her, claiming she spoke too many truths that people wished to bury. But that morning she seemed to have been waiting. "I didn't ask for anything to follow me," she whispered, her hands trembling as she clutched the water container. The old woman chuckled, a low sound that did not carry humor. "No one asks. Shadows break only when something hunts the soul. And last night, child, yours was hunted." Her heart dropped. She wanted to deny it, wanted to tell the old woman that she didn't know what she was talking about. But the memory of her shadow stepping forward without her permission burned too brightly in her mind. "What does it want with me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The seer tilted her head, studying her with unsettling calm. "It wants what all lost things want. A home. A body. A name. You happened to walk where the wall between worlds thinned. And something old smelled your fear." Cold spread through her chest, slow and suffocating. "You must be wrong," she insisted weakly. "I did nothing." Nakora's expression hardened. "That is the danger. You think you were chosen because of your actions. No. These things choose because of what you are. Because of what sleeps in your blood." She stepped closer and the air around them seemed to tighten. If your shadow separates again, do not follow it. Do not touch it. Do not speak to it. And if something else follows behind it, her voice dropped to a whisper. Do not look back. A shiver crawled down her spine. What happens if I do? The old woman leaned in so close she could smell the dust and herbs woven into her clothes. Then it will claim you. Piece by piece. Breath by breath. The words hung in the air like a curse. Before she could question further, the old woman turned away, leaning heavily on her stick. Go home before the sun falls. Tonight will be worse. And for the first time since last night, she felt truly afraid, not of her shadow but of what might be walking behind it. That night she tried to follow Nakora's warning. She stayed indoors, kept the small fire burning in the center of her hut, and avoided looking at the walls where her shadow stretched and flickered. Every creak of the wood made her tense. Every rustle outside made her breath catch. She told herself she would be safe until morning, that the old woman's words were only meant to frighten her into caution. But fear sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and impossible to ignore. By the time the moon rose, she could no longer sit still. Something in the air felt wrong, like the air before a storm, thick, charged, waiting. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside her hut, hoping fresh air would steady her. The village was quiet, more than usual, as if the darkness had swallowed all sound. Not even the night insects called. The silence pressed against her ears. She took one step forward and listened. Nothing. Another step. Still nothing. It should have comforted her, but it didn't. The silence felt aware. Watching. She walked a little toward the center of the village, trying to shake the unease that clung to her. Her shadow stayed beneath her feet, still and obedient, but it no longer gave her the comfort it once did. Now she feared even looking at it for too long. She turned back toward her hut, but froze. There was something behind her. She didn't hear it. She didn't see it. She felt it. A pressure, a weight, a coldness that slid over her skin like oily fingers. Her breath became shallow as a chill crept up the back of her neck. Slowly, she glanced sideways without turning her head fully. Her shadow was there on the ground. But beside it, something darker bled across the dirt. It wasn't shaped like a person. It wasn't shaped like anything. It pulsed as if breathing. Her heart pounded. She took a careful step forward. The dark shape behind her stretched, following. Not her shadow, something else, something heavy and restless. She swallowed hard and quickened her pace. The thing behind her matched every step. When she stopped, it did not. It moved once more, sliding across the ground with a slow drag, as though pulled by an invisible thread. She clenched her hands, trying to keep her breathing steady. Nakora's words burned in her mind, do not look back. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But she knew, instinctively, that sudden movement would draw it closer. So she kept walking, one measured step at a time, toward her hut. The thing followed, the air growing colder with every foot she gained. The silence deepened, thick and suffocating. Even the moonlight seemed weaker, unable to touch the shape at her back. As she approached her door, she dared to open her mouth. Leave me, she whispered, barely audible. She didn't expect a response. But something did respond, not in words, not in sound, but in movement. The dark mass behind her quivered, like a predator preparing to pounce. Her stomach dropped. She reached for the door, but before her fingers touched the wood, the thing behind her slid forward with sudden speed. She felt its presence curve around her, brushing the edge of her heel like a cold, deliberate breath. Her knees almost buckled. She grabbed the doorway for support, forcing herself to keep facing forward. She stepped inside, but the darkness moved with her. It did not cross the threshold, she sensed that much, but it pressed against the doorway as if testing it. Slowly the pressure retreated, slipping back into the night. She slammed the door shut, her breath shaking uncontrollably. The fire inside flickered violently, casting frantic shapes across the walls. Her shadow twisted unevenly, as if struggling against something unseen. She backed away until her spine hit the opposite wall. Minutes passed in suffocating silence before her heartbeat settled enough for her to think. When she finally dared to peek through the small gap in her window, she saw nothing at first. Then her eyes adjusted. At the far end of the hut, beneath the mango tree, something darker than the night stood waiting. It did not move. It did not vanish. It simply watched, as if it knew she had seen it and it wanted her to know it was not done. That was the moment she understood. Whatever had followed her was not bound to her shadow. It was something else entirely. Something old. Something hungry. And it had chosen her. Here is exactly 650 words, No headings, no titles, pure story continuation, bro. The next evening, she waited until the sun had dipped low enough to soften the village into gold and shadow. She didn't want to leave her hut, but staying inside felt worse. The walls seemed to pulse with her fear, the firelight trembling too much, as if reacting to something she couldn't see. She needed air. She needed space. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt drawn to walk the long path behind the village, the one the elders called Drum Road. The path earned its name from the dozens of old drums abandoned along its sides. Once, long ago, warriors had used them to summon strength before battle, to mourn their dead, to call the ancestors. But as generations passed, the drums were left to decay beneath the trees. Their skins had cracked, their wooden frames warped, but no one dared burn or toss them. Too many spirits were said to rest inside their hollow bodies. She hesitated at the entrance of the path. The shadows between the drums stretched long and unnaturally dark. But going forward felt easier than going back toward the thing she knew was watching her hut every night. Breathing in a shaky lungful of air, she stepped onto Drum Road. The first drum sat just beyond the bend, half covered in creeping vines. She walked past it slowly. Nothing happened. The silence was thick but familiar. She kept walking. Then, oh. A single, deep heartbeat of sound struck from behind her. She froze mid-step, her blood turning to ice. It couldn't be real. The drum was too old, too broken. But she knew what she heard. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't the wind. It was a drum. And it had beaten once as she passed. Her hands trembled as she forced herself to keep moving. She didn't dare turn back. The next drum sat a little farther ahead, partly sunken into the soil. She swallowed, her mouth dry as dust. Step by step she approached it. Boom. Another pulse. Louder this time. She flinched hard, biting her lip to stop a scream. The sound echoed through the trees, then faded into crushing silence again. Her breath grew shallow. Her body shook with tension. But her legs kept moving, driven by something she didn't understand. She passed a third drum. Boom. Her heartbeat raced in her ears. Every time a drum sounded, something unseen brushed against her spine, something like a cold finger tracing her bones. She quickened her pace. Fourth drum. Boom. Her steps grew frantic, crunching through the dirt. She didn't dare break into a run. She was afraid that if she did, the drums wouldn't stop at a single beat. She feared they would start a rhythm, one meant to call the thing following her closer. Fifth drum. Boom. She whimpered, clutching her shawl tight. The air grew colder. The shadows between the trees seemed to thicken, sliding closer to the path. She felt watched, not by the spirits in the drums, but by the presence that had followed her for nights. She could sense it moving behind her, matching her pace, waiting. Sixth drum. Boom. This one vibrated through the ground, shaking her teeth. She stumbled, catching herself before she fell. Her breath turned sharp and panicked. She wanted to cry. She wanted to vanish. The path ahead stretched forever, and the drums seemed endless. Yet she kept going because stopping felt like surrender. Seventh drum. Boom. The sound rippled like a warning, or a command. Her shadow quivered beneath her feet, flickering as if pulled by an invisible force. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood, forcing herself not to look at it. Eighth drum. Boom. This time the sound was followed by another, a soft dragging noise behind her, like something heavy sliding across the earth. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, terrified of what she might see if she turned around. When she opened them again, the path ahead brightened, the end of Drum Road. Relief surged through her chest. She took a step forward. Ninth drum. Boom. The presence behind her trembled. She felt its breath, or its cold imitation of breath, brush the back of her neck. 10th drum right at the path's end. Boom. The deepest, loudest thud yet. She stumbled out of the shadowed corridor of drums, gasping as moonlight washed over her. The sound stopped. The cold stopped. The presence didn't. It waited at the border of the drums as she hurried away. And somehow she knew the drums hadn't been warning her of it, they had been warning it of her. For the next few nights she tried to control her fear, but it clung to her like a second skin. She moved carefully, spoke little, and avoided walking alone whenever she could. Yet no matter where she went, she felt the thing's presence lingering just out of sight, brushing against her heels, breathing where no living creature stood. It didn't always follow closely, it watched. It waited. It learned her patterns. The knowledge that something so patient hunted her made her stomach twist with dread. Still, she tried to pretend life was normal. She visited the river at dawn, stayed near the center of the village during the day, and returned home before nightfall. But one evening she stayed out a little too long. The sun had already dipped behind the hills when she realized she had wandered farther than usual. She quickened her steps toward the village, the shadows stretching long and thin across the dusty path. Her heart thudded, not yet fear but growing unease. She had to reach home before the presence awoke fully, before her shadow loosened its grip. She took a shortcut past the old baobab tree, breathing fast, hearing her footsteps echo against the dry earth. But something felt strange. Her shadow, always loyal to her feet since the night it broke away, felt lighter. She glanced down as she walked. It moved with her. It stretched and shrank in the flickering twilight. Everything seemed normal at first. But halfway down the path, something in her chest tightened. Her shadow flickered suddenly, not like light shifting but like it hesitated. Like it was thinking. She stopped. Her shadow did not. It took one step forward without her. Her throat tightened. She stood frozen, unable to breathe as her shadow continued walking toward the village, its shape steady, unfazed by her stillness. She backed up horrified. The thing she feared most was happening again, but this time felt different. This time, it didn't move like a lost piece of her breaking free. It moved with intention. It was going somewhere. Her heart pounded as her shadow reached a bend in the path and turned toward her hut. She tried to call after it but her voice cracked. The fading sunlight grew weak, and her shadow slipped into the deepening dark, disappearing ahead. She stumbled forward, panic clawing at her chest. She needed to reach home. She needed to see what her shadow was doing, if it would return to her or if something else waited there. As she neared the village, the air grew colder, sharper. The hut stood strangely silent. No laughter, no animals shifting, no fires crackling. Everything felt suspended. She hurried toward her own hut, but slowed when she saw something that made her blood turn to ice. Her shadow was standing outside her doorway. It wasn't lying flat on the ground. It wasn't waiting beneath her feet. It was standing, upright, pressed against the wall of her hut as though pinned by moonlight. Its shape had her outline, but stretched unnaturally long, bending where no limb of hers bent, rippling at the edges like smoke. She gasped and stumbled back. As soon as she moved, the shadow's head tilted, following her motion even though she was several paces away. It didn't return to her feet. It didn't sink. It watched. Then she noticed something wrong. Terribly wrong. There was another shadow beside it. This one wasn't shaped like her. It wasn't shaped like anything human. It slouched forward, its outline jagged, its lower half dissolving into dark tendrils that pooled like ink on the ground. Its upper shape flickered between forms, a hunched creature, a wide-mouthed figure, a long-limbed beast, none of them consistent. Her breath hitched. Her knees weakened. The presence that had been following her was no longer lurking in the dark. It was standing at her door. Her own shadow leaned toward it as if whispering or listening. The two shapes merged for a moment, then separated, their edges slipping in and out of each other like two puddles of oil trying to fuse. She clapped a hand over her mouth, terrified that any sound would alert them. Slowly, quietly, she sank to the ground behind a pile of dried reeds, her body shaking violently. The night deepened around her, but she couldn't look away. Her shadow eventually peeled itself from the wall, sliding silently back toward her hut. It passed through the doorway, vanishing inside. The creature shadow lingered longer. It turned its head, if it even had a head, and faced the darkness where she hid. She felt its attention pierce her like a needle. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. After a long moment, it slipped into her hut as well. She sat trembling, knowing that when she finally found the courage to enter her home, she would not be walking into an empty space. Something was waiting inside. And her own shadow had invited it. The morning after the silent spirit visited her hut, she felt hollow, as though a part of herself had been taken and left elsewhere, somewhere dark and waiting. The villagers kept their distance, whispering as she passed, their eyes wary, their hands restless. She no longer tried to ignore them. She had realized the presence that followed her was more than her shadow or a single wandering spirit. It was something that had been drawn to her, as if she carried a call in her blood. Desperate for answers, she knew she had to seek the one person who could explain the truth. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her before illness took her parents. If anyone knew the secrets of their lineage, it was her. Her grandmother lived on the far edge of the village, beyond the thick grove of ebony trees. The path was uneven, littered with roots and small stones, but she walked quickly, driven by a mixture of fear and determination. When she arrived, the old woman sat outside her hut, spinning thread from dried fibers, her fingers moving with practiced ease. Her eyes, sharp despite her age, lifted when she saw her granddaughter approach. There was no greeting, only a silence that pressed against her chest. She stepped closer and knelt, lowering her head. "Grandmother," she whispered, "I need to know. I cannot live like this." The older woman set the thread aside and studied her with a weight that made her shiver. "I have been waiting for this day," she said finally, her voice low and gravelly. "It is not fear I see in your eyes alone, it is recognition. Recognition of what has followed you, and of what has always lived within your blood." The girl's breath caught. "Blood? Me? I do not understand." The grandmother sighed, leaning heavily on her cane. "You were never meant to understand fully until it came to you. But it has come. And now you must know." She motioned for the girl to sit beside her. "Our women are different," she began. "Not all but some. The daughters of our line are marked by what the elders called the veil's calling. It is a trace left in our blood by our foremothers, women who walked between worlds, who could see the hidden threads of spirits, who carried voices that others could not hear. They were feared, revered, and sometimes hunted. You are one of these women. And because of that, wandering spirits, lost, curious, hungry, are drawn to you. They are not bound to your shadow but to your essence, to the pull that comes from your blood." She paused, letting the words sink in. The girl shivered. "All my life," she whispered, "I thought I was cursed. That I had done something to anger the spirits." Her grandmother shook her head. "It is not a curse. It is inheritance. Your gift, or burden, has lain dormant until this moment. It awakens when the world senses your power, when the night chooses to notice you." Her grandmother's eyes darkened. "But power without understanding is dangerous. The spirit that followed you, it tests you. It learns you. It will not harm you yet, but if you falter, if fear blinds your mind, it will take advantage. You must learn to move between your world and theirs without surrendering yourself." The girl felt panic rise, tight and suffocating. "How can I do that? How can I keep it from taking me?" The old woman reached for her hand, warm and steady despite her frailty. "First, you must know who you are and what your blood carries. There is strength in our lineage, a strength that comes from understanding. The spirits are drawn to you because they sense both your fear and your potential. Do not let them feed on the first. Nurture the second." A long silence followed, broken only by the faint sound of the wind through the trees. The girl's mind swirled with questions, with images of shadows, echoes, and the night pressing in. She thought of her mother, her grandmother, the stories left untold, the quiet warnings that had always seemed like tales for children. Now she understood they had not been stories at all. They were lessons, waiting for her blood to awaken, waiting for the night to call her. Her grandmother's hand squeezed hers, and the girl felt a flicker of something fierce and stubborn bloom within her, a spark of defiance, a glimmer of power she had never known she possessed. "You are not alone," her grandmother said softly. "But your blood will draw others. You must learn to live with it, to face it, and to understand it before it claims more than your shadow." And in that moment the girl realized that the nights of fear, the wandering shapes, and the silent breath that mirrored hers were not random. They were her inheritance and her destiny. The creature had been circling her life like a storm waiting for the right wind, but the night it finally revealed itself, the world around her seemed to freeze. Even the crickets stopped mid-song, and the trees leaned away as though they feared witnessing what would happen next. She had walked only halfway down the narrow path leading to the river when she felt a heaviness behind her, not footsteps, not breath, just a weight, like someone had draped a thick cloth of darkness over her shoulders. She did not turn immediately. She had learned by now that turning too quickly only made the thing feel closer, as if it fed on her reactions. But when she finally glanced back, slow and cautious, she saw it clearly for the first time. It was not shaped like a person, nor like any spirit the old storytellers described. It stood at the edge of the path like a smear of shadow that had been given bones. Its form pulsed softly, as if breathing through darkness rather than air, and two dim, deep-set lights glowed where eyes should have been, eyes that never blinked, never wavered, never softened. Those lights locked onto her with a hunger she could feel in her chest. She took one step back and the bushes rustled as if recoiling from her. The creature's shape shifted slightly, stretching taller, then narrower, like it was made of flexible night. Her heart pounded in her ears, drowning out the world. It spoke, but its voice wasn't a sound. It was a tremor in the ground beneath her feet, a vibration in her bones. "Give it to me." She swallowed hard, unsure what it meant, unsure why its presence felt colder than the river at midnight. "Give what?" she forced out, though her voice shook like a drum skin struck too hard. The lights that were its eyes dimmed, then brightened again as if pleased that she had spoken. It leaned forward, though its feet never touched the ground. Your name. The word pressed against her like a hand to the throat. She stumbled backward, breath catching in fear. Her grandmother had once said names were not simply sounds, they were anchors. A true name tied a spirit to its body, tied a person to their destiny. Losing it meant losing oneself. And something in this creature's stance told her it wanted not to know her name but to possess it. She shook her head violently. No, the creature's body flickered, the way shadows tremble on a windy night, and then its voice slid through her again. You cannot refuse. It follows you. Watches you. It knows you. She felt the air tighten, pressing in from all sides. Leaves quivered without wind. Her own shadow, stretched thin by moonlight, trembled at her feet like it wanted to flee. She stepped back again, but her heel struck a stone and she nearly fell. The creature moved closer, not walking but gliding, drawn forward by her fear. She tried to call out, but her voice lodged in her throat. It was then she remembered the old seer's words. Some spirits hunt your soul. Some hunt something deeper. She had not understood then. Now she did. If this thing stole her name, it would wear her essence like skin. It would walk in the world as her. It would bind her shadow permanently to its will. She gathered her courage and steadied her breathing. Why my name? She whispered. The lights in its face dimmed again. Because you are not like the others. You are called by the spirits. You are heard. She could feel it probing inward, reaching through her fear, searching for the shape of the word that defined her. A coldness crept through her ribs as if fingers pressed into her very being. She clenched her jaw, fought the instinct to answer, fought the surging pressure inside her chest demanding she speak. The creature leaned so close the world behind it disappeared, swallowed by its dark. Give it, it murmured, voice sliding across her mind like oil. Give me your name, child of wandering blood. She shut her eyes, forcing herself not to say the word rising to her tongue. Her grandmother had warned, never speak your name in fear. Fear gives power. Fear opens doors. And something was knocking, hard. The creature waited, patient, endless. The darkness around it grew as if ready to swallow the path, the night, even her. She held her breath. She held her silence. And in that fragile silence, she knew the creature would not stop until it owned the sound that made her who she was. The night of the ritual arrived with a sky so heavy it felt like the clouds themselves were watching her. The village had gathered in silence around the old stone circle at the edge of the forest, the place where generations had whispered prayers, buried secrets, and called upon ancestors when the living world failed them. Tonight, she stood in the center, barefoot on the cold earth, her breath rising in thin white streams as if her spirit were trying to leave her body before the ceremony even began. Torches flickered around the circle, their flames bending inward instead of rising upward as if drawn toward her. The elders stood in a ring, each holding a calabash of sacred ash, each face painted with symbols older than the trees. She felt the weight of their gazes, not in judgment but in fear. Fear not of her, but of the thing that hunted her name, the thing that had followed her shadow home and stalked her life like a second heartbeat. Her own shadow lay stretched before her, long and dark, trembling even though she was completely still. And just beyond it, at the edge of the torchlight, another darkness shifted, watching, waiting. The entity had come too. It did not hide anymore. The chief elder stepped forward, his voice cracking like brittle wood as he began the chant. The words rose slowly, curling through the night, summoning the ancestors and commanding the boundaries between the living and the unseen to tighten. She felt the air grow thick, each breath felt like swallowing smoke. Two young priests circled her, scattering ash in spirals that glowed faintly under the moonlight. The ritual was meant to separate her from the creature, to cut the tether that had formed between her shadow and the thing stalking her. But as the chanting deepened, a strange pressure built behind her ribs, as if something inside her were pushing outward, searching for a way to break free. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the drums positioned around the circle. Slow, heavy, ancient. The echo vibrated through the earth, and her shadow flickered. The other shadow, its shadow, quivered in response. The two forms pulled toward each other like magnets. She tried to step back, but her legs felt rooted to the soil, as though the earth itself refused to release her. Sweat trickled down her back even though the air was cold enough to numb her fingers. The entity moved closer, its form rippling like water disturbed by stones. Its presence pressed against the circle's boundary, and the torches dimmed in its wake. Some villagers stepped back, mothers pulled their children behind them, and one elder whispered a trembling prayer that the creature would not breach the space meant for humans. Then the moment arrived, when the elders chanted the line that would sever her connection to the thing. She felt the words touch her, not as sound but as force. Her body jerked forward as though someone had pulled her from the inside. Her shadow recoiled violently, stretching and twisting unnaturally, and the creature's shadow lunged forward in reply. The boundary between them thinned. She gasped, clutching her chest as a burning sensation erupted beneath her skin, spreading through her veins like sparks. She could feel the creature trying to reach her from across the circle. It wasn't just resisting the separation, it was fighting to merge with her completely. Its voice seeped into her mind like cold wind sliding beneath a door. You cannot divide what is already joined. She shook her head desperately, tears burning her eyes as she tried to force the voice out. But the creature pushed deeper. Her shadow suddenly snapped forward as if pulled by invisible hands, slamming into the earth at the creature's feet. Gasps burst from the villagers. The creature's shape expanded, rising taller, darker, more solid, feeding on her fear and the thinning barrier between them. The priests tried to hold the ritual together, their voices rising sharply, but the creature's presence twisted the air, making their words falter. She screamed as something tugged inside her, pulling at the core of her being. Her name, her true name, throbbed within her like a trapped drumbeat. The creature wanted it, wanted all of her. It stepped fully into the circle, ignoring the sacred boundaries, and reached toward her with a limb made of shifting night. The torches went out. Darkness swallowed everything except the thin glow of the ash spirals on the ground. She felt the creature's cold touch brush against her chest, and for a moment her own shadow wavered, torn between her body and the entity trying to claim it. Then, somewhere deep inside her, a different force stirred, a memory of her grandmother's voice, a warmth that did not belong to the living world. She clung to it like a lifeline, pushing back against the cold that threatened to consume her. The creature hissed, its form trembling as if struck. For a heartbeat, the pull weakened. She gasped, dragging in air like someone rising from deep water. The elder's chants regained strength, weaving around her like a shield. Light burst through the ash spirals, forming a thin barrier between her and the entity. The creature recoiled, its shadow ripping away from hers in jagged shreds of darkness. The ritual did not end cleanly, and the separation was incomplete. Her shadow was still damaged, still touched by the creature, still tied to its hunger. But the merge had been stopped, for now. And as the creature slid back into the darkness beyond the circle, its final whisper followed her like a curse. One day you will call me. The morning was thick with mist, and the village felt suspended between night and day. She stepped onto the main path, the dew soaking her bare feet, her heart hammering with dread and exhaustion. The nights had grown unbearable. Each shadow, each whisper, each presence lurking just beyond the torchlight had worn her down. Yet she knew the final reckoning had arrived. She could not hide any longer and she could not run. Behind her, something waited, stretching the darkness like a curtain, coiling it around her heels. She could feel its patience, the hunger that had followed her for weeks, waiting for this moment. Her shadow flickered beneath her, trembling, as if it sensed the attention of the entire village would soon turn toward them. The villagers had gathered in the square, drawn by the rumors, by the fear, by the growing tension that had refused to stay confined to hushed whispers. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, elders leaned heavily on sticks, and men who usually mocked the tales of spirits now stood stiff with unease. Their eyes tracked her path as she walked toward the center of the village, toward the place where she had first seen her shadow break away. Her breath came in short, trembling gasps, her pulse a drum in her ears, but she kept her head high. Whatever happened next, it would not catch her unaware. As she reached the center, the mist began to shift unnaturally. Shadows twisted along the ground, and the entity that had stalked her nights, her shadow's pursuer, rose from the edges of the fog. It was larger than she remembered, its form more defined yet no less terrifying. Two deep lights burned from within its darkness, eyes that held hunger, patience, and something ancient she could not name. Its limbs were long, undulating like smoke, its lower half dissolving into tendrils that slithered across the ground toward the villagers. A collective gasp swept through the crowd as the air itself seemed to grow heavier, pressing against their chests, stealing their courage. Her own shadow flickered and stretched, torn between her body and the creature's pull. She stepped forward and raised her hands, trying to call forth the strength she had discovered during the ritual of two shadows. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, "Do not give in. Do not fear. Name yourself and the darkness cannot claim you." She forced herself to breathe, to center herself, to remember the blood that ran through her veins, the lineage of women who had faced spirits and survived. Then the creature spoke, its voice vibrating through the ground, the air, and the minds of everyone present. "Give me what is yours," it demanded. "Give me your name." It extended a dark limb, reaching, probing, claiming. The villagers shuddered, some falling to their knees, others screaming, but none moved forward. They could not. Only she could confront this. She stood firm. The mist clung to her like a cloak, and her shadow mirrored her stance, trembling but loyal. Summoning the courage she had cultivated over nights of terror, she spoke her true name aloud. The sound vibrated through the village square, ringing against walls, trees, and stone. It was not a cry of fear but a declaration of existence, a tether that anchored her to herself and severed the hold the creature had tried to claim. The darkness recoiled, twisting and snarling like a wounded animal. Its tendrils shrank, writhing back toward the fog, its eyes narrowing as it hissed in fury. The villagers could finally see it, not just the shadow, not just the echo, but the entity itself, vast and terrifying, moving in the shape of night and fear. Their eyes widened as they realized the truth. The stories, the whispers, the fear were real. They had all seen her falter in private, had all ignored the signs, but now the horror trailing her was undeniable. Mothers wept openly, elders muttered prayers, and the children who had pointed at her in fear trembled beside them. The creature shrank, now aware that it could not possess her while her name was spoken, while her essence remained tethered to her own body and bloodline. The mist began to dissolve under the growing sunlight, the creature retreating toward the forest's edge. It lingered, a promise rather than a threat, until finally it slipped into the shadows, leaving her shadow whole again, grounded and obedient at her feet. She stood tall, breathing heavily, her pulse gradually slowing as the villagers approached cautiously, some reaching out, others still fearful, yet all witnessing the reality they could no longer deny. In that moment she understood the power of her lineage, the strength of her blood, and the truth of what had followed her home. She had faced the entity and survived, but the village would never be the same. The world had seen what she carried, and she had proven that fear could be met, that shadows could be challenged, and that the unknown, no matter how ancient or hungry, could be faced by one who knew her own name. The village square fell into a stunned silence, punctuated only by the distant rustle of trees and the faint, fading hiss of darkness retreating. She stood in the light of dawn, her shadow firm and loyal at her side, and knew the nights ahead would no longer be hers alone. They would be a reminder to all who saw, that some power could not be hidden, and some names, once spoken, could never be claimed.